Senior Program Manager here at EED, managing, among other, our work in Sudan. I'm very glad to be able to welcome you all here to this very interesting panel. We are very glad to be able such a platform for a discussion on the most complex yet very pertinent issue related to the crisis in Sudan that has now been going on for more than 3 years. So EED is a grant-making organization, and we support civil society, human rights organizations, independent media, and other pro-democracy actors in the European neighborhood and beyond. We are currently able to make a small but vital contribution to the peace and democracy aspirations of the people of Sudan, thanks to a grant from the EU delegation in Khartoum, as well as some member states' contributions. We support some of the key human rights organizations and independent media outlets that provide vital documentation and analysis of the current crisis in Sudan, and I would be most glad to tell you more about that bilaterally. And in addition to this grant-making work, we also try to provide platforms for the community of practice as well as our grantees to make their voices heard, and this afternoon is one of those events. I will therefore now pass on the mic to David for an introduction to today's discussion, and look forward to all the insights and the discussion we will benefit from today. Thank you.
Oh, yeah, I think just before, can you hear me? Thanks. Cheers. Okay. Thank you so much, Andrea. My name is Shona Murray. I'm a journalist with Euronews. So I just want to maybe give a little background before we go on to David. As we know, Sudan's civilian population has already been the victim of armed conflicts and humanitarian emergencies for generations within the framework of, as we heard from Andrea, a very complex geopolitical context. But the most recent armed conflict has been described as the largest humanitarian crisis in the world, which, among many other things, has brought about 12 to 13 million people who have been forcibly displaced and become refugees. The ongoing armed conflict in Sudan is characterized by the perpetuation of international crimes since April 23, when the Rapid Support Forces, RSF, formerly known as the Janjaweed Alliance, of the Sudanese defense apparatus launched full-scale military operations against the Sudanese armed forces. So it's within that context that we will be putting a spotlight on this catastrophic situation in Sudan with this esteemed panel of experts. And as Andrea said there, we'd like to, first of all, introduce Professor David Donat-Katan of NYU Center for Global Affairs to give us, an overview, but also look at the European Union's context here as well. The floor is yours, David.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Shona. Does it work?
Just talk straight right into it.
Yes.
You should turn the other one off.
Here you go, just take it.
Thank you very much, Shona, and it's a really great honor, Andrea, to be here at the European Endowment for Democracy. I recognize it's mid-July, it's very difficult to organize a meeting in a very important place as Brussels is, but as a proud Italian and European citizen, I want to really thank you because you carry an important name, and we are very, very honored to be your guest today. NYU Center for Global Affairs, together with the Sentry, here represented by my colleague Carrie, who will speak later, have put together their forces today to try to bring in a spotlight on the situation in Sudan. Shona, who so generously agreed to host us today as a chairperson and moderator, already told you about the humanitarian crisis. Yet, Sudan is not an accessible country. It's not as evident to everyone what's going on in Sudan, not to the person in the street, even though we as practitioners, we know what's going on in Sudan. We have prominent voices today from Sudan, so we'll know more their perspective. What I can just say is that there has been an history of civil wars. There has been a window of opportunity with a change, a small window of opportunity between 2021 and 2023 after the Bashir dictatorship. And then there has been a new, fully fledged civil war, which is unique because it's not between the government and a rebel or rebels or groups, insurrectional movements. It's between two wings of the same government to a certain extent. two elements of the army fighting for power with each other, with the goal of profiting from power, as if being in power is the way to perpetuate a model to enrich and prosper. Enrich and prosper a very tiny fraction of the population, represented by these proliferating security sector, to the detriment of the majority of the population, which is what we call the civilian population, right? And very well represented today. On behalf of NYU, I don't have anything more to say now than to give the floor again to the moderator. Just to say our commitment is to ensure that there is the most objective and scientifically sound research available to the decision makers. Those decision makers that are in nation states, sovereignty is alive and kicking, states are ruling the world. There are plenty of armed conflict demonstrating that that's the case. We love to have a world peace, a world government. That we're not there. An international rule of law. We have important representatives here in the audience from the International Bar Association, other great organizations that promote an international rule of law. We are not yet there. But we still have entities, and as an Italian and European, I'm proud of the European Union, still entities that believe in multilateralism and international cooperation as the way forward to resolve conflicts and other crisis situations. And I really hope that today's panel will inspire the next steps. And thank you, Shona.
So the way we're going to sort of do the discussion, because we have about 2 hours and we have plenty of time for questions and engagement, so please do that, because we really want this to be an active discussion. But we're splitting everything up into subsections, and as David said there, we do have people from Sudan here, which is very, very important. So the first sort of section will be addressing mass victimization, human rights abuses, and impunity, and we'll have obviously the perspectives of victims and the affected community. So I'd like to introduce our first part of this, Mohamed Osman, who's here beside me from Human Rights Watch, Moneim Adam, and Dr. Mutassim Ali, who's actually joining us from Nairobi, I think. Doctor, is that right? Nairobi? You're very welcome, and thank you very much for joining us. Each panelist will give maybe 9-10 minutes of their perspectives, and we'll have a little discussion afterwards, and please do engage and ask any questions at the end. But I might start beside me to Mo Osman. The floor is yours, Mo.
Thanks a lot. I mean, just echoing the appreciation of being in this space. The conversation around accountability in Sudan for a while, even prior to the conflict, has been quite absent. So I think this is a very good convening, and timely so, given the risk of impeding atrocities that are taking place at the moment in Sudan. I was coming here with different exciting intros to start the conversation, but I just remember one anecdote that, for me, sits very well with the conversation around impunity, about how impunity will fuel violence. For some of the Sudanese here in the crowd, we remember very well in June 3rd, 2019, when the bloody dispersal of the sit-in took place. I was just there just few weeks before that happened, and there were few attacks took place before the dispersal of the sit-in at the time. And one of the interesting anecdotes and interviews I had done is one person telling me that if there was an accountability for the protests that took place years ago in 2013, probably this will not happen. If there was accountability for what happened in 2018, 2019 wouldn't happen. If there was accountability in 2019, June 3rd will not happen. I talked to this person quite recently, and he exactly repeated the same thing. He said there was an accountability for what happened in the coup in 2021, probably the war wouldn't happen. So for me, this is like an important anecdote, starting point when we are looking at the impunity as an issue. There is the domestic aspect of it, and there is the international aspect of it as well. And I think it's important being here in Brussels to know when we engage with these conversations is right now we cannot go again into the classical justice versus peace paradox. The lessons of Sudan over the last years has been telling us quite well, I mean, not even last decades, telling us very well, if you are saying justice, we're not going to do justice now, peace should come first, that doesn't work. What works is enable commanders, abusive commanders, to use the political marketplace in the country, their powers, to evade accountability, to face any kind of consequences. If the international community will still engage with these commanders, that means that you're abusing to the power more than engaging with the principled position around accountability. And I remember at that time, the transitional period, which is, I'm sure many of us have very conflicted feelings about in many ways, just spending time with families of victims and witnesses, prosecutors, and we stay in places until like midnight, collecting evidence and working on the cases. There was very little investment from the international community at the time around justice. And that was very, very visible after the coup happened in 2021, when part of that power focus of different actors was more into the mediation between the civilian and the military component. What happened is that we sidelined a significant part of the population, the youth movement, the resistance committees at the time, which is now mostly known as the emergency response firms. They were not part of the conversation. So that's, just like to finish my point here, I think the impunity is in the heart of everything. Not just the impunity of domestic actors, but the impunity also for the enablers, of the backers of the conflict. I mean, from Human Rights Watch and other groups and media groups as well, we have been extensively documenting the external interference by the United Arab Emirates, for example. It has been difficult and will continue to be difficult, politically speaking, to see a global reaction to hold the United Arab Emirates accountable. Particularly right now, we are talking about an impending threat of atrocity in Al Ubaid in Kurdistan. But of course, there are also other actors that involved in the conflict, which also need to be held accountable. So again, the impunity as a word, I know it's a buzzword, but it's really, for me, is the main catalyst and driver of violations. I mean, we have perpetrators filming themselves committing atrocities. I don't know if there's any other sign that a perpetrator fear no consequence if they're not doing this. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much. Moneim, if you want to take the floor.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for EED for hosting this, and thank you as well for the organizers for all the effort. Thank you, Mohamed Osman, as well for the intervention. I would really like to start from the last point that Mohamed Osman finishes with, which is the EU decision. Recently, I think, as not only as Sudanese, but actually as well people working in this space, we should celebrate that in the beginning, as like one of the institutions in the climate of international justice today that took the step to protect human rights and to act as well as like to put at least an idea of an instrument that can help bring about accountability for the impunity that lasted for long that Mohamed Osman spoke about. I'm going to speak as well about like a few recommendations related to this and how civil society, international institutions, and NGOs how can support this, and as well the challenges that we can see that may face this decision as well. But I think I wanted as well to start with a little bit of a background on what is happening in Sudan as well. We've been advocating from the beginning, actually, in fact, before the war, that the situation in Sudan is going to go out of hands because of the elements related to the very tense mobilization among militias versus tribal kind of institutions. Now we see that the RSF is an institution that kind of like put together as part of part of like hundreds of tribes that really doesn't anything that put them together, only some slogans done as like cursing against some historical issues that in Sudan. And I think there is like no roadmap for this to be handled. In the beginning, when the war really broke out, we're like discussing with some colleagues, and one person from Somalia stated that when the war in Somalia started, there were only two groups, and they were advocating for the international community to intervene early enough to stop the conflict. Otherwise, he said after 1 year or 2 years, they have more than 50 groups who are fighting, and it's so difficult to put them together around the table. As well, when the war broke out in Sudan in 2023, very clear elements that the tribes under the RSF, there's like nothing can hold them together to go and fight for long together. And as well, the fractions under SAF, who are different militias, kind of like tightened together, you know, because of the benefit, because of issues related as well to extractivism, including Arabic gum, including gold and other resources. So I think they are only kind of like both sides. If you look at them as entities, are so difficult to see that there is kind of a clear future without handle this through peace negotiations, through kind of mediation, through pressure. If that's not happening soon, the later is going to be handled as well as harder is going to be. So this is really kind of like the point. Now we see over the last month fighting among both sides, within both sides actually. We see like a tribal conflict within RSF tribes from South Darfur and across. And I think really now there is very clear signs as we're looking at the situation online. We see that the conflict is going to start as well in Kordofan within the RSF themselves. And this is going to be as well make it a little bit difficult to be handled. Within SAF as well, we see how they're attacking different fractions within the militias forming SAF. And I think as well that's something really we're supposed to look at, and the pressure in on the international community is supposed to continue in order to handle this sooner than later. I was as well wanted to go back as well to the decision done by the EU. This is really, as I mentioned earlier, something really that we're supposed to celebrate, because it's really kind of you know, one of the very few things happened in the recent years that we see that supporting the international, like a support clearly from the international community or a decision to handle the issues related to the conflict in Sudan. There are a few things really we're supposed to recommend now, and as well in engagement directly with the EU, and I think as well just there are some challenges going to face how this is supposed to be looked at and how it's going to be played out, because sanctions generally can impact the international entities. However, they have ways of bypassing that. But if we look at the sanctions in the past, it can as well impact the community in Sudan who are like left with a lot of means in order to survive. We see that people, you know, like really kind of like harvesting Arabic gum, or like working in the gold and mining. So I think really the decision should be clear about in future, if there is any mechanism for implementation, to look at how this decision is going to be implemented without impacting the people who are kind of in Sudan, but they are not actually the gold or like their activities in Sudan, their economical activities in Sudan, they are not connected directly by fueling the war. And as well, I think the decision should as well give the civil society the resources in order to do documentation, to support any connection, because as well gold is one of the very difficult tasks to follow. If it is melted, or like if it is smuggled and melted somewhere else, it's so difficult as well to go back and say. So I think actually more resources for organizations to make sure that any gold is going from Sudan through all the routes is going to be followed by institutions locally and internationally and in the region. And I think that's really a key to make sure that this is kind of as well, the decision can help to bring and to put an end to these kind of like actors who are fueling the war. And I think as well supporting generally the NGOs in Sudan and the region, or like the international organizations, after the recent development from last year that impacted mostly all the organizations who are working in the sector. Plus as well the EU is kind of like one of the institutions really supporting the international institutions, including the ICC. We see recently, or like 2 days ago, the recent information coming from the US, or like the decision made. I think as well the EU is one of the institutions kind of as well is still supporting that, supporting the UNFFM. You know, in the past really we kind of like pressured the EU or like other institutions to bring about accountability, but now as well we're supposed to support the ICC. In fact, I think some of you were at the ASP in the Hague, And we saw how like really like in organizations impacted and people were like living in fear. So I think really kind of like that is something we have all to come together in order to support these decisions, as well as we're supposed to work with them critically and provide the necessary information in order to make sure that these are useful and these are actually put to bring about accountability. I think I'll end it there, but I can as well come back later if there are comments and questions.
Okay, thank you very much. And then finally for this piece, if Dr. Ali, if you can hear us okay?
Yes, I can hear you.
Are you okay?
Thank
The
you.
floor is yours. Thank you very
Can
much.
you hear me?
Yes.
Thank you very much. First, I just want to note that my internet perhaps is breaking up a little bit, and please feel free to notify me via chat function if there is like an issue. I just want to compliment you all, especially David, for convening us here today. This is definitely a timely event as Sudan is facing one of the largest humanitarian catastrophe, and with the city of Al-Ubaid, the capital of North Kordofan, now on the verge of being overtaken by the RSF. Just to give a little bit about my organization, is the Raoul Wallenberg Center for Human Rights. It's a Canadian-based organization that mobilizes and engages a nonpartisan global coalition of parliamentarians, scholars, and jurists, activists, and students to take a collective stand for national justice and human rights. It is founded by the Honorable Erwin Cutler, the former Minister of Justice and Attorney General of Canada. And we're guided by the Raoul Wallenberg's legacy of moral courage. We work to ensure protection of individuals persecuted by authoritarian regimes for their advocacy and civic engagement. And so we've been working on Sudan for the last couple of years. And as we convene here today, really during the time that demands clarity, courage, and moral insistence. And as I was preparing for this event, I was asked to focus on the recent communication we filed under Article 15 to the International Criminal Court, to the Office of the Prosecutor. The communication submitted to the Office of the Prosecutor is really enriched with, with substantial evidence. Does more than outlining the crimes committed in Sudan and Darfur in particular. It exposes a truth that Sudanese communities have lived with for years, right? The violence in Sudan is not it's not only local. It is engineered, amplified, and sustained by external hands. And that is really the key here. The filing, the communication, states plainly that unrestricted influx of arms and other supplies to perpetrators will perpetuate and expand the violence. Warning echoed by the former prosecutor of the ICC, Luis Moreno Ocampo. And this is really not a theoretical concern. It is a lived reality. It is the reason thousands of Sudanese are not alive today. It is the reason millions of Sudanese have been uprooted from their homes. And so the communication documents what survivors have been telling us all along for the last 3 years, a little more, that the atrocities in Al Junaina, the city in West Darfur, in Al Fashir in North Darfur, and in Zamzam, in Nayala, and many other places, did not happen in isolation. They were enabled by an extensive network of foreign officials, arms suppliers, and mercenary recruiters who turned Darfur into a marketplace of death. As the filing explains, individuals based primarily in the United Arab Emirates established a web of arms supply routes, and recruited and deployed Colombian mercenaries, so the Sudanese and Ethiopians and many others to support the RSF in Darfur These are not abstract supply lines. These are the veins through which violence flows. And on the other hand, on the other side of the conflict, the Sudanese armed forces, the SAF, have been bolstered by external actors as well. The communication notes that external actors such as Egypt or even Iran have provided drones, explosive intelligence, and logistics support of war has not to protect civilians, but to strike them indiscriminately, repeatedly, and unlawfully. This is why the suffering feels endless, because perpetrators are not fighting alone. They are backed by powerful patrons and who believe they can act without consequence. But today, can you hear me?
Yeah, just your internet connection is a little bit stalled at times, but we might give it another minute.
Oh, my apologies about that.
No, it's
That's
okay.
exactly what I expected. So I'll try to conclude here quickly. So what we believe through this communication is that the ICC.
Dr. Ali, do you want to turn off your camera, and that might save you a little bit of, might not put so much pressure on the Wi-Fi. If you want to turn your camera off, now continue.
Yeah. Okay. I'll just try to conclude with it. The dinner is really terrible here. So what we believe is that the ICC has a critical role to play. The court is an independent institution. It's uniquely positioned to pierce the shield of impunity that my colleagues Osman and Moneim spoke about, that foreign actors have enjoyed for decades. As the communication argues, the Office of the Prosecutor must expand the Darfur investigation to include senior foreign officials beyond Sudanese nationals, because without accountability for external actors, justice will remain incomplete and prevention will remain impossible. The filing reminds us that the suffering of the Sudanese people will not end as long as the perpetrators of atrocity crimes and the networks of impunity that enable and sustain them continue to act without consequence. These words are not just analysis, they are a plea from survivors, from displaced families, from communities who have watched the world debate their fate while their homes burn. And so today I ask all of us to embrace a simple but a transformative truth. Ending atrocities in Sudan requires ending the external support that fuels them. If we cut off the supply lines that we talked about, we cut off the violence. If we hold foreign officials accountable, we disrupt the machinery of genocide. If we enforce the arms embargo, we give civilians a chance to live. This is not just a strategy, it is justice. It is prevention, and it is the only way forward. I'll leave it there, and my apologies again for the internet.
No problem at all. No, we got 95% of it, so thanks very much for that, Dr. Ali. I mean, let's just move on, maybe just to Mo, maybe, or Moneim, if you want to take this point, just the point that Dr. Ali was making there about impunity, that it's not just those who are perpetrating, but the enablement by people outside Sudan, not just Sudanese actors or officials, but a whole wealth of arms dealers, arms manufacturers, and also obviously outside countries that have enabled all of these horrendous atrocities. Yeah, go ahead, and then, go
on. I think, yes, thank you as well, Dr. Matasim. In mid-April, we did a small kind of like short investigation about the report that issued by Volkswagen, as like they bought gold that kind of coming from Sudan in their report, in their annual report of 2024. And we did kind of a very basic report, as just like looking at the situation in Sudan. There is no gold that you can say, in most cases, coming through the channels of the UAE or other places. that international companies such as Volkswagen, they don't even speak about their internal due diligence as like they bought this gold from Sudan. So I think actually this mechanism really can help as well to target these kind of institutions. And as well, I think all of us, we are aware about the case of BNP Paribas. If there were no sanctions, it's so difficult as well to target these kind of entities. And I think as well there is like other point about I think foreigners who are kind of ennobling the warring parties. I think they're really playing a great role. We saw all the investigations that report about the mercenaries and as well about the weapons were sent, facilitated or manufactured in the UAE and other places, and actually ended up used in the conflict in Sudan. I think these are all kind of evidence. I think if we don't have these mechanisms, we are not going to be able to address that. I mean, yes, it's difficult to follow this kind of, you know, because especially kind of like, you know, the road that Dr. Mu'tasim and his colleague, they took to the ICC through Article 15. But I think as well it's important to follow all because the Sudan catastrophe and the conflict caused a lot of violations. So I think we have really to follow all these kind of jurisdictions, including universal jurisdiction, with which we can speak later as well, and other kind of mechanisms in order to target all the people enablers or like who are acting directly to fuel the war.
But Mo, I mean, international jurisdiction and other, I mean, the systems are there for impunity not to be the case, but there doesn't seem to be a willingness from the international community or the European Union maybe, or at all to end the situation, the catastrophe in Sudan. I mean, you mentioned it earlier, if there hadn't been impunity for various other years, decades beforehand, we wouldn't be in this position now. But now more than ever, there seems to be sort of carelessness around it.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is exactly the whole issue. I mean, I completely agree with my colleagues Moneim and Dr. Mu'tasim as well. I mean, the enablers play a very significant role. I know that it has been said before when people ask how we can end the war in Sudan, and then the answer would be like, President Trump pick up the phone, call the UAE, say don't send weapons. And it sounds as a cliche, but I think there's a sense of reality as a policy action, and also applies to the EU and other global leaders, that this is exactly one of the significant factors of the violence and the atrocities that is taking place and will continue to take place anyway. Sudan is not exceptional to this. We have seen this in Yemen, we have seen that in Libya. The war makes more profit than peace. That's also the other thing when we talk about it. And that leads me to the point around sanctions as well. I mean, I know this is going to come in the later conversation. When we think about sanctions, it's not just something we drop up every few months. The theory of change that we need to ask ourselves how we can use these sanctions to inflict or generate a behavioral change of the warring parties, and to which end. So that's, I think, maybe a better, more political thinking in terms of also how we use sanctions. I mean, I remember very well from the start of the conflict, everyone was talking about the UAE. Talking to policymakers in different capitals, the response often and the questions like, where is the smoking gun? Right now, I think we have a full machine gun of evidence of like, this is happening, and we know you're talking to them, and we know you're doing this. Now, probably need to move the needle a little bit to move beyond the private chat to the public chat. I mean, we have seen, I mean, just the example around the goal, for example, you know, the resolution from the European Parliament that for the first time named the UAE as one, which is great. I mean, late but great. Like, you know, the bar of expectation can be lowered, but that's just an example. Just looking at, you know, the role of the enablers, and again coming to the point of the impunity and how that will, if we're not addressing that, the violence will continue. The interest of domestic and external actors will also continue.
And we will move on to the research in the UAE with Dr. Matthew Hedges momentarily. But Dr. Mu'tasim, if you can hear us there still, can you?
Yes, I can.
Oh, Grant. I just wanted to ask you, because your organisation's Canadian, you were saying earlier, and maybe you could tell us a little bit about your reaction to the US decision to dismantle the ICC at a moment like this.
I mean, that's really very unfortunate, right? We know that the U.S. has a very complicated relationship with the ICC since its inception. But I think the measures taken by the current administration completely undermine the needs and the demands of people like the people of Sudan or Myanmar and other places. And so I think for the people of Sudan at the moment, the ICC remains perhaps the only institution that can hold those responsible of the current atrocities to account. There exist no domestic legal regimes, and the regional mechanisms are also ineffective in terms of holding those responsible to account, and therefore the ICC remains the last resort, for the people of Darfur, and I'm sure many other victims of atrocity. And so I think the U.S.'s decision is really unfortunate, disturbing, but I also don't think this is a new thing. I think some of the measures that are announced through the statement, I think have been taken already a while back, and so I think there's much that we can do to urge the United States and other governments to support the ICC's efforts and other sort of judicial institutions to hold those responsible to account.
Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Mutasim Ali. I'm going to move on now, actually, to unless anybody wanted to ask a question there, of our panel, or should I just move on? I'll move on, maybe, and we can get on to questions later again. Okay, so I want to introduce Dr. Matthew Hedges, who's part of our sort of academic researchers' treatment on this subject matter. Matthew, you were a victim of arbitrary detention, torture when conducting research into the UAE and the security policies there in Yemen and in East Africa. Can you tell us your actual experience and what happened, first of all?
Good afternoon. Thank you very much for taking time out of your day to be here. So yeah, I'm going to try to use my expertise and experience to highlight the nature of the relationship between events in Sudan, the Emirati guardianship over the RSF, and domestic repression and policies at home. I was, as noted, I was tortured and held in solitary confinement for 7 months by the UAE's State Security Department. I was later sentenced to life imprisonment for espionage, espionage on behalf of the British government. That said, my experience and what I saw, I'm totally aware of how Abu Dhabi, how it practices its own pursuit and ambition of maximum control, how that policy is replicated from the domestic audience into international and foreign domains. It's my belief, and it's certainly not an exaggeration to say, that without Emirati support for the RSF, many of the war crimes that have occurred would not have been able to have, they couldn't have happened without Emirati support. It's not to say that potentially, maybe or maybe not actively involved in it, but without their facilitation of personnel, of troops, of supporting the facilitation of money, of profit, revenue, it wouldn't have enabled certain actions to occur, and that's looking in retrospect, let alone what's happening now or what could happen in the future. The Emirati approach to domestic and foreign policy is one of persistent maximum control. Domestically, this means that everything is under the direct control, observation of the state. There is nothing independent which could, in theory, contest state interests. If you don't actively support state narratives, policies, you are seen not only as a threat but an enemy of the regime itself. This demand for maximum control ranges from extensive human informant networks that would impress the Stasi through to a digital surveillance structure and architecture that makes it impossible for any any independent thought or action to occur. We've seen this especially over the recent war with Iran, where people, if they have filmed a missile attack, or if they've filmed a UAV over a residential area, they've been imprisoned. Any idea, even the slightest blemish on the state reputation is seen as a strategic and critical threat and risk. This is only further magnified when looking at any issues or any attempt to highlight the Emirati involvement in Sudan. Abu Dhabi's reaction to these attempts have been fierce. You can only see when Mohamed bin Salman met President Trump in November, and President Trump announced his interest in potentially hosting mediation. This led to the Emirati separatists in Yemen trying to take over South Yemen to try to pursue their policy of succession and independence, and has led to a critical breakdown in the bilateral relationship between the UAE and Saudi Arabia. The way that the Emiratis enforce this strategy and policy of maximum control is through harsh penalties and even more unimaginable practices. Torture is commonplace. I've experienced it, I've seen it, and I only know a small part of what does happen across the rest of the system. I think most alarmingly, however, there's also been a growing number of cases where the Emirati state security has actually reported deaths of persons in their custody, and this includes a former Minister of Information, a Yemeni Minister of Information. This includes, there was one a couple months ago of a Lebanese man who had died in state security custody, and that's not the type of report that the Emiratis would normally communicate, except for the fact of as a threat to other persons, to stand back. To demonstrate Abu Dhabi's true intent and need for that maximum control, there's a practical level of this, and this is best shown in the state security prisons. It looks like a Stanley Kubrick movie. Everything would be a single color. When I say everything, I mean the buildings, the floors, the clothes. There is nothing of any other color. All you live in that time is I don't know, it could be red, it could be white. It's only this color. There is nothing else. When combined with sleep deprivation, when combined with physical acts of torture, and everything else that can happen, it doesn't just break an individual's spirit. It sends something far more dangerous that is inherent across society, where there isn't any independence, any sovereignty left. It's just one of maximum state control. This is then further replicated and duplicated when looking at foreign policy. The UAE's rich financial reserves have been, strategically and well developed over several decades. The Abu Dhabi Investment Authority recently announced its 50th birthday, which demonstrates how much of a long-term view they look at different domains. We can see in Europe, we can see in America. The Emiratis are experts at identifying those strategic nodes, strategic investment opportunities to control critical infrastructure, to control critical technologies, access. But seen from another perspective, it's all about maintaining and sustaining a controlling stake in access and controlling a potential to weaponize this investment and finance. In the UK, we expelled Chinese investments over the nuclear power stations and some other domains, but citing security fears. But we have foreign states, say, owning the train networks, but the Emiratis, for example, also own majority stakes in our offshore wind farms. They own the ports and networks to be able to get from UK to Europe. If you're able and willing to expel a country because they could threaten you through weaponized interests in one, if you simply allow another country to come in and do the same thing, you're not committing to that same policy, you're just you're willing to turn a blind eye when in the future this could easily change. This also enforces the UAE's centrality, both as a destination or as a supplier of finance and investment, but also as a destination to transport, to connect to third-party domains. And we've seen it with planes, flights, weapons, manufacturing, exporting, re-exporting, bringing in raw materials, melting them down into different products, and out again. And I'm sure we'll hear more about how these strategic industries and capabilities are being exploited. But the UAE is then not only working with exploiting their access in Sudan to generate their own simple profit, but through different financial mechanisms, say with India, with Russia, through trade in bilateral trade in local currencies, they're able to elevate and amplify that comprehensive trade that doesn't occur in dollars, so it's not circumspect to the same sanctions potential. Basically, the second it comes into the UAE, you lose the ability to sanction it unless you aren't going after the enabling industries and persons. You can attack a target, you can attack a company or a person, but it's very quick and easy to establish a company, to change the ownership, to change the name, and those sanctions immediately become useless. I'll quickly just state that while the UAE's foreign policy interests in, as we've heard, in Libya, Sudan, Somalia, Yemen, and many other states, if they can't secure an investment opportunity, they try to subvert it through the creation of these different entities. They've lost ground in many of these spaces, but despite that, they continue to invest and they continue to push hard, and that's predominantly because there hasn't been any sufficient accountability or deterrence by third-party states. If this had occurred, if there had been greater attention and effort placed on the enabling, say, industries or the assets that, in the case of gold, which we know is one of the main exports, going after the gold refineries themselves, that would have the biggest impact because it would take that piece off the map, so to say. It's just a thought and suggestion. I know it's very easy. I'm not a lawyer, so it sounds very easy when I know it's not. But thank you very much for being here.
No, just thank you for that, Matthew, because actually just before we started this discussion, I was reading off, the UK did announce a number of sanctions against the gold networks, including 11 individuals and some of the companies involved as well, which they say is going to be, go quite deep in targeting what is fueling the war. Would you agree that that actually is the case, or it's tip of the iceberg, or as you mentioned there, they're not going after the gold facilities themselves, but just the companies? What's your reaction to that UK decision?
So, first of all, of course, you'd need to sanction those individuals involved, especially if they're RSF financiers who have done. There's certainly enough evidence, otherwise the sanctions wouldn't be there. But they're then sanctioning companies of which, as we spoke earlier, the UAE prides itself in being a business-friendly environment. How quick and easy you can set up a company in a day. If that's one of the big draws of the state, and you are sanctioning a company that's taken 6, 9, 12 months to put together this sanctions package, those UK sanctions are possibly nearly ineffective today, let alone tomorrow, because you can just set up another company and you would have to do this process all over again. So that's why I would suggest or encourage identifying the enablers. When I say the enablers, it's those hard assets, because the hard assets can't be simply transferred.
So what you say, when you say enablers, give me an example
Sure.
of what would be a really, actually groundbreaking sanction.
So it could be gold refinery in Dubai, mercantile Dubai Multi-Commodity Center, is that right, DMCC? Or possibly the airports, the airport companies, or the ports, because if that's how they have used certain ships, they've used certain facilities to transfer those raw commodities from Sudan in this case. That's what's going to continue to occur. The gold refinery will process it and make it profitable, but they still have to bring the resources in somehow. So you can go after an individual or a company, but if they weren't able to bring it in the first place, that would be the strongest way to do it.
And what about, I mean, you mentioned there that the Emirates are involved in the ports and various other vital assets in the UK. When did that start? And like, obviously there would be you would imagine that the British government had some thought process about allowing that sort of influence, particularly when in light of, well, we saw the interdependence that the European Union and particular countries like Germany had with Russia and so on.
Yeah, this sadly is a never-ending story of a state attaching itself or a continent attaching itself to one partner, finding out after several years that it's a dangerous threat, trying to divest and doing so quite badly, and that's not everyone is poor at doing this. The UAE, it learnt that it had to significantly increase its reach and engagement with certainly Western states after 9/11. DP World, the one of the state big conglomerate, they were denied access to controlling stakes in American ports in 2007 by the US Congress, and that was on national security concerns. Since then, they've undertaken a considerable, information operations, a lobbying campaign to improve their image. Nowadays, they're pledging over $1 trillion of investments into, say, the Trump administration, and they had the export controls relaxed to be able to secure greater AI and technology access. That does the same thing, but not in a hard asset ish. It's not as directly assault. It's not a direct assault in that same manner. But when I mentioned the ports, because P&O Ferry is a subsidiary of DP World, they fired their entire workforce. Now, it may not have that completely detrimental impact. Or like with Russia, with Nord Stream, if they can simply turn off a tap, if they can truly weaponize a strategic asset at will, you have a really serious problem. Now, what the Emiratis are doing, what they have great success, and they are targeting France and Germany at the moment for considerable investments, is simply increasing their offers, increasing it, because no one else can match them. Economies are in a poor state, so there is little to no other option, and actually they've used.
So when you say they're increasing their offers, they're increasing their offer to invest in critical infrastructure within a country that maybe the exchequer can't afford to do.
There've been, in the last month, there have been a huge amount of defense technology agreements between the UAE and France, huge investments. A year or so ago, you had the UAE working to they had a French MP fired for fake corruption claims. They've created a new mercenary unit made up of former French special forces, and this created a real issue with Paris. That's just in the last year and a half. There are deep and ingrained issues, and what I was going to say is that when there was some rising criticism of the UAE in regards to Sudan, this was very quickly, this has been harshly constricted by the Foreign Office, by government, because they're afraid that the UAE could withdraw its investments. We've had this in different investment conferences, and there's been a rigid control of any criticism. So hence this announcement today by the Foreign Office was fascinating, but it's highly likely it was done in coordination with the UAE, because...
So you're saying that the British government is coordinating with UAE to have a sort of a whitewash of a sanction statement in order to placate people who are obviously deeply concerned about the relationship. But in actual fact, the UK government is concerned that the UAE may withdraw its investment in the UK.
Yeah, there have been examples of this in the press, and you can then see different experiences of the former Foreign Affairs Select Committee chairman. Her name was Alicia Kearns. When she raised this, there was a lot of commotion in response. There was a story a week or two ago in The Guardian about the Foreign Office denying MPs access to certain emails that they had requested because they didn't want to release certain intelligence aspects of the UAE in Sudan, and there's quite a considerable campaign institutionally to withhold this. And the UK is desperate for the investment, and that's simply why.
Wow. Well, that actually is an important segue into our next sort of section of this discussion. Thank you very much, by the way, Matthew. That was absolutely fascinating and terrifying. But thank you so much for taking the time to come here today. And we'll obviously have lots more engagement with the audience here as well. But our next sort of section is about international crimes, international wrongful acts, and the interplay between individual criminal responsibility and, of course, state responsibility. And we have two professors of law who are going to speak to us on this. We have Professor Julie Goffin, and we also have Dr. David, who's there beside me, and Julie is down the end there as well. Perfect. Here you go. Okay, I'll give you that. David, you have the microphone there. So.
Thank you. Thank you very much to the organizers, and thank you, David, for reaching out to me, as we were saying so many times after we met in Arusha as we were starting our career, our path into international criminal law. So David was asked me to share a few thoughts from my experience in the representation of victims before the ICC in 3 cases and 1 situation. So I've been doing this for the last more than 25 years now, and explain a bit how victims are really crucial and so important in terms of bringing the authors and the perpetrators to justice from the start, and actually in each and every step of the whole proceeding before the ICC, but also in terms of complementarity and in terms of building cases for domestic courts and domestic tribunals. Just before that, quick reminder of the situation in Darfur as it stands before the ICC as of today. So as you know, the situation in Darfur was a referral from the UN Security Council Resolution 1593, which is the only referral from the UN Security Council apart from Libya. So the scope of the situation is limited in space, so geographically limited to Darfur, but not limited in terms of and as to the temporal scope of the ICC jurisdiction and competence, which is good and which is something I will come back to later. So from there, from the referral from the UN Security Council, then investigation started in 2003 upon crimes committed back to 2002, 2003, 2004. And then it led to actually from the situation to the opening of 6 cases. So you know, before the ICC you have situation and then which will lead the prosecution to identify specific facts which may, which should and would lead to the opening of cases. So 6 cases. One of them, which is now heading to the reparation phase after a trial before the ICC, and I'll get back to that. One case for which the charges were not confirmed, and 4 accused who are at large. I can't enter into too many developments on that, but just to say that accused being at large doesn't mean that the ICC cannot do anything. There's a number of proceedings in terms of asking states to fully comply with their obligations in terms of cooperation with the ICC. And also you'll see in the last reports from the OTP before the UN Security Council how she, so the deputy prosecutor, is working and trying to work with states, different states, including Sudan, in order to try to go a bit forward into, arresting the accused that are still at large. So now, in terms of the Abdelrahman case, which is now reaching, as I was saying, to the phase of reparation before the ICC. Very interesting is the fact that it's a very good example of how important the role of victim is, as I was saying, in starting the investigation, but also at every step of the whole process. Again, the prosecution in its report before the UN Council really underlined the importance of the role of the victims. We've heard how an Article 15 has been filed with the prosecution, so just a bit to explain. When you assist victims in this process of trying to start investigation and feed the investigation and trying to have finally trials opening before the ICC. We've been doing in the 3 different cases and also in other situations on which I've been working in Belgium with victims of different mass crimes, is to really go up through Article 15 communication to the prosecutor, and also to fill in forms which are sent to the registry and which will help the registry gathering a number of information with the objective to have in the end those victims participating to the trial and then in the end get reparation. It's really important to follow the 2 venues because by collecting all possible information from the victim, as a lawyer, you can then identify which of the victims may have very good stories to tell and to be transmitted then under Article 15 to the prosecution. So it's really important to have the broader overview on the stories of the victims. It's important in terms of procedural aspects. It's also important in terms of complementarity, because by gathering all those information, you can use them before the ICC, but of course also pretty much to feed domestic prosecutions, and as is the case in Ukraine, for example, where you have a very good coordination between the ICC, domestic courts, and this cooperation between different judicial venues is really important. But it's also important for the victims, and that's something I've discovered with time, and I've learned to manage also, is that when you work with the victims in cases, and Palestine, for example, is a very good example, where you suspect that no trial is going to come very soon, it's also a way for the victims to share their stories. And it's important as a lawyer to not create undue expectations with the victims, to really talk frankly with them, to say, look, it's not going to be tomorrow that those people are going to be prosecuted or to go to trial. So it's up to you to see whether you want to go on into sharing your story and filling the form, very practically filling the form and sending them to the court. And it's really incredible how so many times I have those victims saying, okay, I understand it perfectly, but I want to give my contribution to the process of trying all together, keeping the fire alive and trying to go up to the end of the whole process. And also, just by sharing my story, it exists. It exists, and that's what I recognize as a part of a reparation for me. So this is really, really important. And again, the Abdelrahman case is something in which the fight from the victims from the start and their willingness to go on was really important. I'm going to be maybe a bit too long, but I'd like to go then quickly to the question of the participation of the victims during the trial. This is extremely important also, and I want to insist on that because we may have heard so many times, and not only from the defense in many cases, that all that the victims want is just reparation after the trial, after the conviction, and this is so untrue. Participation of the victims to the trial is a form of reparation for them, and it is so important for, I would say, everyone, because they have so much to bring in the trial, including in bringing a different view of the case from the prosecution. And we've been fighting as legal representative so many times, including with judges. Luckily, one of them has left the court now, but still, we've been fighting against judges who would say, okay, we consider that you have no interest in examining this witness because what we've seen from the prosecution examination is enough, and we presume that it's enough for you too. And it's really important that everyone at the court, including the judges, keep in mind that the prosecution view might not be the one of the victims, and they have a unique view on what happened on the ground. No, in the end, of course, comes the reparation phase, and we'll see, and it's going on quite smoothly with a very good team of legal representatives of victims in the Abdelrahman case. I have hundreds of stories that I could tell about victims explaining how the court changed their life, and not only through the reparation, but also through their participation to the trial. This is again very important. So the victims are really the ones we should more listen to in terms of finding, of fighting actually the critics from the court. It's really, I would say, of course you will always have victims criticizing the court because it's never enough and there's always issues. But at the same time, as what was said before, for almost all the victims before the court is the only way they can get justice. All of our clients, in one of the cases I'm in before the ICC, they have filed complaints before the national authorities with no success, and they know nothing is going to come out of this. So the ICC is the only way for them to get some form of justice, and this is really important. Frustration can come from the fact that, and this is the case for sure in each and every case before the court, from the fact that there is this limitation in scope, both temporally and geographically, and you will always have victims who, for example, have been victims of the attack 1 month before the scope of the case, or in the village just next to the scope of the case, who will feel that it's completely unfair. There's also, of course, the thing that many victims, again, in all of the cases I've been involved in, who would say, it's good, this person has been convicted, but he's not the only one. Or above him, there was a number of other persons. It was addressed also. But then we go to the difficulties in terms of establishing the chain command and the different modes of liability, and we know how complicated it has been for the prosecution to prosecute big fish, and how hard it is for the court. just to finish on this, not only are the victims really essential for the whole work and each step of the work of the court, but they are also probably the best defenders of the court's work, and we should really more listen to them because they are the ones who will be defended in the court nowadays. So, and this message is maybe in priority to the court itself, because the court still has to work on securing a better role and a better status for the victims within the proceeding, and securing a proper, complete and independent legal representation of those victims at each steps of the whole proceeding. Welcome to your questions, of course, but thank you.
David, do you want to take the floor?
Thank you very much. And I think I want to start with not a negative note, if I'm allowed, and then move forward towards the issue of state responsibility. I just read the statement issued by Andrea Karlsson on behalf of the European Union for International Justice Day, which is tomorrow. Tomorrow is the anniversary of the adoption of the Rome Statute. It's a very strong statement that defends the integrity of the Rome Statute. This is one of the 4 priorities of the EU decision on the International Criminal Court dating back to 2011, but it's a repetition of something that we had already in 2002, the year of the entry into force, when the US tried to create a global web of what Amnesty International, another group called the bilateral impunity agreements, which were non-surrender agreements. And many states that didn't enter into such agreements suffer from economic repercussions, but they stood firm. And then finally, at that time, the second Bush administration removed or stopped promoting this policy. And finally, in 2005, the United States did not object to the referral of the Sudan-Darfur situation to the jurisdiction of the ICC. That's why we have now some hope for some victims. Because the problem of that resolution is that it's only covering Darfur. Judges are very cautious not to expand their mandate, and that's where I also want to be positive. I know that someone here represents the European Parliament, and the European Parliament already in November issued a very strong resolution, very comprehensive, much more comprehensive than any other document, in which it also requested specifically the Security Council to expand the referral to the entire Sudanese armed conflict. Of course, the Council will not do it, because who's sitting in the Council? The Russian Federation, which is at war with Ukraine and already blocked all the activities of the Council. They already start blocking it during Syria, so it's nothing new. You know, it's we are back to the time of the Cold War, and then there are other states that may now follow in alliance with that position. So just to say here that we have an institution working, and I think Julie helped us a lot with this focus on victims' rights to understand that this justice is not done in the name of some abstract idea that we all want to have peace, democracy, and the rule of law worldwide. No, we want the actual human rights of individuals who have suffered, who have been tortured, whose father and mother were killed, or they have lost their children, or you know, they are survivors, whether they are direct survivors or they are victims, but they haven't survived themselves, but they have lost their dearest ones, and they have a right to know the truth, their right to access to justice, their right to reparations, and the main reparation, let me move to state responsibility here, because under the Rome Statute, under the ILC articles on state responsibility, under customary international law, states are responsible for internationally wrongful acts. If what Dr. Hedges, who is an academic, who went to the UAE to make academic research, because he omitted that point. He was there on behalf of Durham University, correctly working on your PhD, accumulating evidence for a scientific research, not going against this or that state for any political reason, but for looking at securitarianism, authoritarianism, how the two link and eventually lead to human rights violations. In that process, he was incarcerated. So, when states commit those acts, Not only individuals who are victims of it have right to justice, not only there are victims and then in crimes under international that may occur, but we also have the possibility to impose countermeasures or unfriendly acts that we call retortions, which are short of violating the right of the other side. And this is what the European Union, I believe, did. By way of retortion, they issued a thematic or sector type of sanction that my colleagues later on will comment on in the gold economy. But these are retortions. These are very what we call restrictive measures here in EU law. They are named sanctions. They are not really sanctions. Sanctions are when you deprive a state of his or her right, and you violate the right of states under international law, but the wrongfulness of that measure is precluded by the fact that you act in proportionate and necessary countermeasure. So the question is, if all this evidence is available regarding, for example, the responsibility linking the UAE to the RSF, time has come to impose this type of very direct measures on these state entity, which have, and I know this is almost impossible. I'm here talking as a public international lawyer who's giving the toolbox to those who are available to comment on this in the world of public opinion, the media that you represent here, Shona, as well as those from institutions that are confronted with the interest of member states. We know that that field of international law is under-practiced. But sooner or later, we'll be obliged to return to it, because the alternative is appeasement, and we have seen it, our appeasement towards situations like the annexation of Crimea and other situations led to the current situation of fully fledged armed conflicts, war of aggression in our continent of Europe. In Africa, they have seen these types of situations for a longer time, with very little consequences on the ground. So, and I know this is very difficult, but I think it's our duty to provide these scenarios. Going back to the principle of individual criminal responsibility, where instead we have made a lot of progress, because we have an ICC. The ICC is there, and it's investigating. And this is where probably the intervention from our colleague Mutasin got obscured when he referred to the participation of foreign states in the enabling also the crime committed by the Sudanese armed forces. And he was referring, I think we heard Egypt, but I think we missed Turkey. Turkey didn't come through.
I don't think he said Turkey, but anyway.
You heard it, then I didn't hear it. And I think he referred to another state where I see the link less clear, but I'm looking forward to read their materials. And I think there is a lot to be done in respect of those individuals who are actually creating these installations, making those contracts, implementing those agreements, furnishing the weaponry and the technology to kill and destroy cities like El Fasher. To all those, there is this New York Times investigation of 2 years ago, which is in every report of the UN, where it was understood that the biggest humanitarian infrastructure connecting Chad with Darfur, which has been totally funded by the UAE, with an amount of money that is equal to the GDP of Chad of 2024, when this was set up. So an enormous amount of money. This is like using the red crescent flag, but it has been used to ship every form of equipment to the RSF. And there are satellite pictures, and there is really a big body of evidence. I do not exclude, but I have no evidence about it, but I do not exclude that the Office of the Prosecutor at the ICC, when it recently announced that there is a breakthrough in evidence gathering on Darfur, I don't exclude that breakthrough might have been linking that situation with the responsibility of some very important personality investing, the authors of this $1.5 billion investment on the border. And I don't exclude that these will link directly to the Dagal or the head of the RSF or others connected to him, an individual who is also under US sanction that were undertaken before the end of the previous administration and never revoked as of today. So, all to say that the law of state responsibility and the law of individual criminal responsibility, albeit separated under the principle of distinction and separation, they work hand in hand, and they are with us. And this is to provide some hope in the future, because enough is enough. The civilian populations have suffered enough, and I think from here we can only have improvements of the situation. And I've seen recent decisions by the EU going in the right direction, but I really hope that from where we are today, we can, in the next phases, report on other progresses. And at the end of the day, of course, a political solution will be necessary for the conflict. Don't think that we lawyers are naive. Don't believe that there is mediation, conciliation, and other efforts that needs to be put on the ground. That's inevitable. But by attributing to those who bear the greatest responsibility the consequences for what they've been doing, by raising the costs of the continuation of the war, we can help peace. So let me conclude by quoting Mohamed here when he referred to the justice versus peace paradox. And in fact, justice reinforces peace. Of course, we cannot pretend that it will apply to all, only to some, but that's the reality in which we live. Not everybody who kills an individual in Belgium is brought to justice. What is the impunity rate? It's quite large. In my own country, Italy, is close to 50%. So that doesn't matter. We have to punish the individuals who commit murder, and we will have the laws that will be there. So why is it for a murder of an individual we have to continue to criminalize, and for those ordering the killing of hundreds of thousands or tens of thousands, we can live with a next leader of a pacified country? For how long? Is that durable peace? So I think in that sense the paradox, Mohamed, is totally correct, and we will have to make use of the law that we have to ensure that the next peace agreement or ceasefire arrangement will be as solid as possible.
Thank you very much, David. Fascinating. And we will get back to you with some questions, but I just want to move on to because we have two more sort of panels. This one it relates to EU sanctions, the ones that are targeting domestic and international or actors in relation to the conflict in Sudan, and also the UAE as well, I hope. But I would like to introduce our two panelists, Sarah Seymour and also Kerry O'Donoghue. Sarah, do you want to maybe take us off there?
Thank you very much. Thank you for the invitation, David. Thank you for the organizer. And ladies and gentlemen, I would like to begin with words from a mother from El Fashir, whom I represent as a lawyer. She has lost both of her sons, one under bombardment and the other one under torture in a detention facility from the Rapid Support Forces militia. And she says, his body was never returned to us. No document confirming his death was ever given to us. What I want to say is that behind every sanction files, you have always the same thing. You have names, you have faces, you have bodies that are never returned. And that's why, on behalf of these Sudanese civilians, I've submitted a request for examination and sanctions for targeted sanctions to individuals and legal entities, to the High Representative of the European Union, Kaja Kallas. And I want to explain you exactly what it is, what it's not, and why it is legally well-funded, to my mind, and why I believe it's a useful tool, given that we have different judicial avenues and we are trying to use all the tools we have that could be relevant for the victims. But I need to be fair, first of all, because I know that the EU has not stood idle since October 2023. It has taken a dedicated sanction regime for Sudan. 18 individuals and 8 legal entities have been designated today. And as we said 2 days ago, on the 14th July, the Council prohibited Sudanese gold, the import and the purchase, as well as the export of the mercury and the cyanide used to extract it. So this is one step, and I welcome it just for the victims. But when we look at this list, the list of sanctions, it stops at Sudan borders, and that's the main problem. Not one official of a third state appears on this list, and this war doesn't finance itself. The drones that bomb El Fashir, the weapons that breached the embargo, the Colombian mercenaries recruited abroad, and I know that the Sentry made a great report on this, also the Guardian, and as well as the property portfolio in Dubai, and the Sentry did a great work on this. All of this traces a chain. And as a lawyer, my sources were these cross-checked and corroborating sources, such as the UN experts, the fact-finding missions of the UN, the Sentry, Amnesty International, Human Rights Watch, the New York Times, the Guardian, and other local NGO. And all that chains leads back to the United Arab Emirates. And in other words, we sanction the hand that pulls the trigger, but never the hand that harms it, never the hands that pays for it. And the European Parliament, as you said, has understood this. Last November, 503 votes were calling for the restrictive measure to be extended. And lastly, on 9 July, one step further, in its resolution for the siege of El Obeid, the European Parliament named an entity based in the Emirates, GSSG, Global Security Services Group, for violation of the arms embargo. And it's one of the 4 legal entities that we named in our request. So what is missing, to my mind, I'm a lawyer, so I'm always doing criticism, it's the implementation. But for a point of a method, because everything else depends on it, I need to be really rigorous. Our request of the 10 May of this year is not a judicial proceeding. It's not a criminal complaint. It's not a claim before a court. It's a request addressed to a politic authority, the High Representative, Kaja Kallas, asking her to exercise her power to submit a proposal with a view to the Council under the Article 29 of the Treaty of the EU and 215 of the TFEU. So restrictive measures are not punitive, they are preventive. There is no conviction, there is no finding of guilt, the presumption of innocence remains intact, of course subject to full judicial review of the General Court of the European Union and the CADI 2 case. But what we have is a sufficiently solid factual basis. And to name is not to judge. But precisely because it's not a judicial proceeding, it's a kind of substitute for nothing. It's complementary. It's complementary, as my colleague says, because the time of justice is not the time of the plaintiff, of the victims. And we have different judicial avenues, and we discussed it already. First of all, we have the ICC, vested with the jurisdiction of Darfur since Resolution 1593, and its Office of Prosecutor has been investigating crimes committed since April 2023, including El Fashir. So the door is open, and I think that my esteemed colleague Rodney Dixon-Casey will talk about this. And, well, we have a criminal avenue against the foreign backers, and therefore it's not closed, it's under its way. But if we look at the timescales, it's not a criticism for judges. I know they are doing amazing work, and the ICC is trying to function despite the US sanction, which is really dangerous now. But when we take the example of Ali Kushaib in October 2025, it concerns crimes committed in 2003 and 2004. So it means 20 years between the commission of crimes and the verdict. And for the current war, there is no arrest warrant issued. And we have the other avenue, let's say, is the International Court of Justice, so the interstate avenue, who has been closed because last May 2025, the ICJ removed the case Sudan versus Emirates from its general list because of lack of jurisdiction, while recalling that the absence of a judge does not extinguish the substantive obligation. So I'm sure justice will come, it takes time, but while the ICC will investigate, the drones flies, the weapons get through, the gold circulates, and sanction can act now. In the short-term solution, it can be a solution for the plaintiff, because it's here to chalk off and to limit the financial and the logistical flows that feed the conflict, while justice, at its own pace, establish responsibility. So the two timeframes are not in opposition, but they're interlocked. And the European Union has a tool, which is really relevant to my mind, is the European Union Global Human Rights Sanction Regime, established by the Council decision in 1999. And it applies to serious violations wherever they are committed. And it targets not only individual but legal entities, and not only direct perpetrators, but anyone who provides them with financial, technical, or material support. So, and it covers also international qualification under international criminal law, such as genocide, war crimes, crimes against humanity, torture, sexual violence. And this is exactly what the fact-finding missions of the UN is documenting in El Fasher, and where last February it identified the markers of a genocide in Sudan. And also, I want to add an element, is that sanctioning the facilitators, it's not a diplomatic favor. As you said, David, the European Union and the states, they have obligation. And it means complying with their own obligation. The prohibition on aiding or assisting an internationally wrongful act. The duty to cooperate to end serious breaches of the most important norms we have in our international order, and the obligation to prevent genocide from the moment a serious risk is known, and of course the Geneva Convention. Before my closing remarks, I try to be really short. I try to analyze what I did as a lawyer, because we are not a lot of lawyers today to submit requests for examination and sanction, because it's not really a judicial proceeding, as I explained, but it's a tool that I want to analyze, and it's quite singular about this initiative. You know, the law of European law and sanction, it's a vertical law. So we have the High Representative making proposal, and then we need to have an unanimous council decision. So it does not provide a right to petition. It's really vertical. But when we submit this legal request for sanction with the group of survivors from Al Fasher, we try to reverse that logic. And they apply directly to the High Representative, requesting an inquiry, designation of 8 individuals and 4 entities. So it were senior Emirati officials, Emirati and Sudanese businessmen, and shell companies. And in doing so, sanctions cease to be like a mere instrument of foreign policy, but it's a kind of right to an effective remedy. And I analyze it like it produced 3 effects to my mind. First, a recognition. It means that an EU institution will officially name those who made the crimes possible. 2, an interruption. Asset freeze and travel bans dry up the flow while the conflict continue. And 3, preservation. Asset frozen today will be asset available maybe before the ICC in case of a reparation once responsibility has been judicially established. And I have 3 requests to conclude. First of all, that the High Representative exercise her power to submit proposal and open the examination of the 12 designations we are seeking, or that the member states take the matter up. So every government or people working at the EU Parliament and in this room can table that proposal tomorrow. And I want just to make a path move forward with regard to the situation in Sudan, because we have news today, and there are significant discrepancies, inconsistencies between what the US and the UK done and taken as a measure and sanction between the EU. And we've learned today that the FDCO has sanctioned Sudanese citizen Abu Dar, Mazin Fadlallah, Ahmed Mashim, and also 2 companies that we submit in our proposal, Aoun Commercial Brokers and Prodigious Real Estate. So we hope that the EU will do the same at the same level at the US and the FDCO for the UK. So we are asking also for consistency. And third, I hope that maybe we will institutionalize what we have done without any established procedure, because I hope that the formal channel for civil society to submit designation request to the Union with the duty to give a reasoned response will be useful, of course, with some criteria to submit a serious admissible complaint, for instance. And I hope that this group of civilians that I represent will open maybe a future procedure. Just to finish, this civilian and this mother, they are not asking for charity. They are just asking Europe to stop treating the alleged financier of Atrocity as respectable partners. I know it's not politically correct, but I have to do it. And sanction will not judge. The judge will do their own job, but they can right now raise the price of blood and stop the war machine actually in Sudan, and preserve the assets for reparation maybe before the ICC. And the European Union has this legal power, so I think that we need political will, and it's here in Brussels, so I hope the message will be heard, and I thank you again for your time.
Thank you, Sarah. Carrie, perfect. Thank you. Thanks, Sarah. Yeah, thank you so much, and it's really a pleasure to be here today. Thank you so much to our hosts here at the European Endowment for Democracy, and to David for inviting us to be here. I'm here today on behalf of the Sentry. For those of you who don't know us, we are a non-profit investigative and policy organisation working at the intersection of illicit finance with conflict, corruption and natural resources. We combine in-depth investigations that take a deep dive into the enabling networks and financial aspects behind some of the world's greatest atrocities and human suffering, looking at who makes it all possible and who is profiting. So very much what we've been touching on here today. We combine our investigations with targeted policy efforts, engaging with policymakers and key stakeholders to tackle impunity and hold to account those who benefit from conflict. Our geographic footprint includes Sudan and South Sudan, countries in which we have a very long track record, but we also work in the DRC, the Central African Republic, Mali, the wider Sahel region, as well as Zimbabwe, Libya, Azerbaijan and Myanmar. We also have thematic programs around illegal logging, gold and conflict minerals, sports washing, as well as the spread of Wagner Africa Corps across Africa. We very much try to shine a spotlight on those places that don't get enough attention, and we advocate for targeted network sanctions against those individuals and entities, often behind the scenes, that enable and support the kind of atrocities unfolding in Sudan. I don't think I need to say much more about the current context in Sudan, but what I will say is the conflict is destabilizing neighboring countries and intensifying regional insecurity. And what's very clear today, and I think clear in general, is that external actors are playing a major role in prolonging this conflict. I'm going to borrow a line from our co-founder, John Prendergast, who describes Sudan as a captured state, a kleptocracy ruled by thieves. Within the kleptocratic system, the thieves had a falling out, resulting in this current war between the Sudanese armed forces and the RSF. Sudan has effectively been hijacked, including by external actors, with a shift from looting oil to smuggling gold out of the country, 99% of it going to the UAE, with so far little consequence. I'm going to try and go into some detail now on two of our most recent reports. Sarah's referenced some of them already today. These reports firmly place the UAE within the ecosystem controlled by the RSF. These were led by our investigator, Nick Donovan, who is much better than I will be at going into the weeds on these, but I will try. The first report that I'd like to speak about suggests that the RSF receives support, including military support,
from the highest levels of the UAE government, something which the UAE denies. This alert that we published in November last year links the Colombian mercenaries operating in Sudan on behalf of the RSF to a business partner of a high-level UAE government official. These Colombian mercenaries, who call themselves the Desert Wolves, have reportedly joined the fighting in Sudan and are also training child soldiers for the RSF. Our investigation took a deep dive into corporate records and found that the Emirati businessmen supplying the mercenaries to the RSF, mercenaries who have since been implicated in the October siege of El Fasher, which we've now heard bears the hallmarks of genocide, is in fact a business partner of the Secretary General of the Presidential Court in the UAE, a position equivalent to that of the White House Chief of Staff. Global Security Services Group, GSSG, a UAE registered company that arranges for the deployment of these Colombian mercenaries to Sudan, described itself as the only armed private security services provider for the UAE government. Their clients include the Ministry of Interior and the Foreign Ministry. GSSG is now wholly owned by Emirati businessman Mohamed Hamdan Al-Zab since its transfer in 2017. However, the company was first set up in 2016 by Ahmed Mohamed Al-Hamari, the long-standing Secretary General of the Presidential Court of the UAE. The Presidential Court is chaired by Vice President and Deputy Prime Minister of the UAE, Sheikh Mansour. This is the man reportedly responsible for the UAE's support for the RSF. From at least 2024, GSSG contracted with the Colombian Security Recruitment Agency to supply hundreds of former soldiers to work in Sudan. This firm, A4SI, is reportedly controlled by Alvaro Quijano, a retired Colombian colonel based in the UAE, and owned by his wife, Claudia Oliveros. The contract signed by the Colombian mercenaries authorized GSSG to transfer their salaries to a Panama-registered company, which pays them via an offshore account. In September last year, the Sudanese government submitted a complaint to the UN Security Council, naming both GSSG and A4SI, and accusing the UAE of meddling in its ongoing war, something the UAE continues to deny. Since then, the Colombian and Panamanian individuals and companies have been sanctioned, but the Emirati company, GSSG, has not been. The second report that I would like to speak to was one we published in October last year. This one details how a network of businessmen with ties to the RSF established a network of companies in the UAE to support the war effort in Sudan, with gold smuggling very much at the core. Our investigation identified 5 key individuals, 3 Sudanese and 2 Emiratis, that we believe should be investigated, with views to designate them for sanctions. Through interviews and financial forensic analysis, we found that this business network established a variety of companies in the UAE, including things like a jewellery company, an interior design firm, and management consultancy, as well as the involvement of Mazen Fadallah, one of the identified 5, the one who's just been sanctioned in the UK today, in 4 Dubai-based gold companies, providing just a glimpse into the conflict gold supply chain that is funding this armed conflict. Perhaps just to go back a little bit, though, to the years before this war began, during which the RSF and its leadership diversified their business interests into a wide array of economic sectors. Without going too much into the details, this encompassed everything from gold mining and mine security to the export of mercenaries, the provision of border guards, and stretches as wide as livestock trade, abattoirs, tourism, and construction, as well as a vast property portfolio in Dubai worth over 20 million euros. We've also written about this in a report that went out in April this year. Sudanese warlord Remedies sits at the apex of what we call a paramilitary industrial complex, in charge of both the RSF but also this sprawling multinational business network. Together with his brothers, his wealth and the RSF's control of Sudan's gold industry expanded throughout the 2010s, along with this diverse portfolio of wealth-creating activities. During this period, Remedies' younger brother, Algoni Daglo, established Trade of General Trading, an RSF procurement firm also based in Dubai, which has since been sanctioned. Whilst the Daglo brothers controlled the network, it does seem they came to rely on a small team of loyal lieutenants to run the business empire. Mazen Fadlallah was a core part of the RSF's procurement team. In 2019, acting on behalf of Trader, he bought almost 200 Toyota Land Cruiser pickups, which are routinely converted into technicals used in desert warfare. Meanwhile, businessmen closely linked to the Daglo family sold everything from baby milk formula in Sudan to home furnishings in Rwanda, as well as a private security company in Khartoum and a mining company in Mali. At times, these activities provided covers for direct support to the RSF, as in the example of Trader buying vehicles, whilst other companies in the network were used to buy unmanned drone parts and supplies. In addition to Mazen Fadallah is another Sudanese national, Aboza Habib, who has been sanctioned by the US as the owner and manager of Capital Tap Holding, which was itself sanctioned providing money and weapons to the RSF. The other 3 individuals include another Sudanese national as well as 2 Emirati businessmen. One of these is Neza Al-Hamadi, who was owner of Capital Tap Holding and some of its related companies from its formation in 2021 until January 2024, when the ownership transferred to Aboza Habib right before being sanctioned by the US. However, despite this, and the fact that Al-Hamadi was the hands-on boss of the Capital Tap Group, whose firms worked for the Dagalo family, including for their gold mining company, he remains unsanctioned. What has become clear as the current war progresses and more entities within this network become sanctioned is that the RSF has become more reliant than ever on gold smuggling. This makes the role of the UAE more important than ever, with the RSF's need for corporate vehicles and banks to turn this smuggled gold into hard currency to continue financing the war. In light of our findings and very much the discussion today, we would ask the EU to investigate and apply sanctions accordingly to all those individuals and companies named in our reports, given their clear links to the RSF. This extends beyond Sudan to those companies and individuals in the UAE, but also in Egypt, Turkey, Saudi Arabia, all those that are facilitating the movement of weapons and gold in and out of Sudan. To interrupt the flow of mercenaries to the RSF, the EU also needs to investigate and, if appropriate, sanction the Emirati firms and individuals involved in their supply. Whilst many of the sanctions to date have focused on Sudanese individuals, and with good reason, these individuals often have little to no footprint in the international economy, making sanctions a whole lot less effective. This is why we press for a focus on the war profiteers and the funders, often facilitators and enablers, many of whom are not located in Sudan. I cannot say enough how important networks are. In cases like this, it does very little to sanction an individual, as rarely are they undertaking the business in their own name. This is why we focus so much on mapping the underlying networks that are undertaking the illicit financial activity. We advocate for targeted network sanctions against family members, front companies, banks, and others that are facilitating the activities of the RSF. We fully believe that sanctions work best when implemented multilaterally to maximise their impact and also ease the compliance burden for business. And so we would impress upon the EU to review their current designations related to those individuals and entities connected to the RSF and identify gaps in sanctioning with other jurisdictions with a view to aligning and ensuring maximum impact. We would also ask banks and other financial institutions as well as companies in the gold supply chain to conduct enhanced due diligence when handling transactions involving any of those named. In considering a point of leverage, when we think of the UAE, we think a lot of the country's reputation and how important it is to them. The UAE clearly cares about their reputation and spends a lot of time and money carefully cultivating it. Think about their ever-growing role as a global financial and investment centre, their airline Emirates, and the sponsorship of sports around the world, from the Premier League to horse racing to Formula One and the Tour de France, and in the US, their partnership with the NBA, the National Basketball Association, and recent NBA champions, the New York Knicks. Given this, we launched a sports washing campaign in May, exposing the UAE's support of the RSF in a bid to turn the UAE's reputation laundering strategy into reputational damage, something we do plan to continue doing until the UAE stops providing the killer drones and other military support to the RSF. A couple of other levers that could be considered by the EU when it comes to the UAE include the recent FATF mutual evaluation, which took place in June. Assessors are currently preparing the report, which will be discussed by the plenary early next year. This presents another opportunity for the EU, both the European Commission and Member States, to ensure that the UAE is doing more, for example in the area of beneficial ownership transparency. Another point of leverage to consider is the ongoing free trade negotiations between the EU and the UAE, which seemingly saw a 6th round of negotiations just completed. This presents another opportunity for the EU to press for the UAE to end support for the RSF.
Thank you, Kerry, as well. And we have one final speaker this evening. I think we're slightly short on time, but the very well-known barrister Rodney Dixon, KC, who's joining us from The Hague. Can you hear us okay? Mr. Dixon, yeah? Brilliant. Oh, you're on mute, are you?
Yes, no, I can hear you. Thank you very much.
Great.
I'm sorry I'm not there, but I'll be very brief because I know you need to wrap up. But thanks for giving me a short opportunity at the end. But without wanting to, labour the legal side too much, which is where I come from, the absolute need, I think, which cries out from what everyone has been saying, to identify the full breadth of criminality that has beset Sudan is more vital than ever. It's not just those who are on the front line, but it's the entire network that is allowing the criminal enterprise to unfold that has to be identified. And that is critical for any of our societies. We all rely on, it's not just a legal question, we want law and order, we want stability. We can't have democracy, and we can't flourish without criminality being tackled. We're not always able to combat it entirely, but what we have in Sudan is exactly the opposite. It's not being dealt with at all. And where the internal system has failed, the responsibility does fall on the international community, on our nation states, on institutions like the EU and others to act. Just two matters that I've noticed recently that have emerged, which I think are vital to take into account when we look at how to deal with that. The first is that there's an increasing rhetoric about saying, well, look, you need to look at all sides in this conflict. They're all equally to blame. And trying to downplay that there might be more actors who are more responsible than others. I've seen this at the Yugoslav tribunal here in The Hague in the early days. It was an easy way of saying, well, you know, in Yugoslavia, they've been fighting there for years. This is what they do. They all fight amongst each other. They're all equally to blame. A similar kind of subtext emerging in relation to Sudan. And of course, all sides have to be looked at. Everyone has to be investigated. No one's saying there's going to be immunity for anyone. But when you start seeing the patterns of evidence emerging, and that's what we have to go on, the evidence, follow the evidence of those who are fueling this, that cannot be ignored. You can't try and downplay that by saying, oh, well, you know, this is quite a complicated internal matter where everyone tends to fight amongst each other. I think we have to fight very hard against that kind of rhetoric taking over and follow the evidence as has been very helpfully outlined in this panel discussion. The second is another concerning trend of saying, well, we need to proceed quite cautiously, and let's take it step by step. We can't just throw everything out with the bathwater. We have to look at understanding the economic and strategic considerations here. So when it comes to the UAE, for example, look, we can't just take the UAE on directly. All our contracts are going to get cancelled, and they're such an important player in the Middle East at the moment. And look what's happening in Iran. We need them. And saying, you know, really what one needs to do is build up slowly through some sanctions here or there, but you can't take on people directly. We'll get to that down the line. And that's all very well if that is going to be the case, if over time and fairly rapidly, because this is escalating out of control very quickly, you do get to that point. But if it becomes an excuse to do nothing and to say, well, we need to just be cautious, then it does prove pretty hopeless. And even though there are a lot of sanctions in play, we've talked about them today, the new ones today from the Foreign Office are, of course, to be welcome, but they do tread quite a careful tightrope line of going only so far and not further. And I'm not trying to undermine them at all in any way. They are a huge step forward, and they must continue. But they do also send a signal about how far are countries going to be prepared to go, how far will the EU go. And if the evidence is there, that's the key, that's what this is based upon, then the criminality should be taken on at its core. It doesn't help to say we'll delay it or get there later or make some excuse as to why it can't be done. We would never accept it in our national jurisdictions if we say, oh, we can't charge that very, very wealthy business person because he'll stop paying a lot of tax, which we need to run our country. Now, of course, we're looking at it at a completely different level when it goes regional and global, but the underlying principle is there. We don't accept these things as an excuse for criminality, and it shouldn't become an excuse for criminality, which is even on a larger scale. So I just wanted to highlight that I think it's vital at this time that when we look at positions that have been put forward, reasons that have been put forward, always think, you know, would that be a defense to criminality? If not, then it shouldn't be part of our policy, whether it's in a legal policy or political policy. We should have that very critical analysis of what's going on. Thanks.
Thank you so much for your time, Rodney. It's a real pleasure to hear from you. Just briefly, because like I said, we are running out of time, but I want to ask you your own reaction to the decision by Marco Rubio to dismantle the ICC and how the implication that's going to have on Sudan and any other cases there at the court, because obviously you're in The Hague there yourself.
Yes, obviously very concerning soundings being made. They're more than soundings because action has been taken already, and it looks like further actions will be taken. And it is somewhat surprising when you look at Sudan, because the US has traditionally wanted to look at using international institutions to target that criminality that I'm talking about. But they've now decided, because they don't like certain parts of the project, that they're just going to rip the whole thing up or try and do that. But the court is resilient. I think if you look at how they are preparing for this, they are ensuring that they can weather the storm, but absolutely vital that the state's parties support them. You can't have double standards in this situation. You can't on the one hand say that this is vital to our survival in the world, but then on the other hand not actually action that's survival. The EU needs to step up with the necessary blocking sanctions, the necessary actions to protect the court and ensure that it can function.
Okay, I think we're going to have to wrap up there, because we've hit 6 o'clock and we've been here for 2 hours, but really unbelievably fascinating discussion, and which can continue.
We can have
Yeah.
maybe 5 minutes extra.
We can, yeah.
With Andrea allowing us 5, 10,
yeah, okay.
8 minutes.
Okay, I might go to the audience there then, because you've been sitting here for 2 hours and it's been just incredible information and perspective. So would anyone like to put a point to our panel, this gentleman here at the very back, and then describe it?
Several African countries. I'm not a Sudan specialist, but I wrote an article last year out of frustration about the lack of action by the EU. So I heard a lot of people complimenting the EU, but if I want to be frank, and you don't have to run away, so former EES colleagues, but I think the EU is hypocrite, because words are cheap. The sanctions decided today or yesterday are ineffective, because gold is not being exported to Europe. So we don't care about gold being exported to Europe. What we need is traceability of gold passing through other channels, including UAE, so that we can block gold trade, which must be traceable, like we have tried to impose things with Kimberley process on diamonds as well, and we should do also with coltan and so forth. All high-value critical materials should be traceable at the international level, not at the bilateral level, because they don't pass to Europe in a direct way. So it's critically important, I think, that the EU indeed, as was mentioned, stands up. And as Sarah said, that's unfortunate. As Sarah said, I mean, we have to stop at the EU level to treat these people as respectable partners. So we have to take the courage, as Mr. Dixon said as well, to not find excuses to delay decisions, but to have to stand up and say, sorry, Emirates, that's a red line, and we have to reconsider how we engage with these people, including through trade agreements we are negotiating. I mean, yesterday Mrs. Kalas was in Ethiopia, presenting Ethiopia as a valuable partner. They were in Egypt a couple of weeks ago, presenting Egypt as a valuable partner. We were in Bahrain a couple of days ago, presenting Bahrain as a valuable partner. But they're all involved. Have you discussed these with these people? I'm doubtful. So we have really to stand up if we want to be credible. I'm sorry. That's part of my frustration. I want to.
That's very important. Does anyone respond before? Yeah, go on.
I mean, I can combine it with closing remarks.
Yeah, go ahead.
That's easier.
No, thank you. I mean, I think it's an important thing. It's the principled position to take. I mean, the UAE and other actors. I mean, I know that with Kalas, for the first time, let's say, she actually talked about Sudan since she came to the office. The response of the EU to the crisis in Ukraine, which is all understandably, it's just next door. It's very different from the response of the EU to Sudan at so many levels. But I think just like as agreeing and kind of like make some quick closing remarks as well. I think one of the main points, I think it's the narrative, which is, I think it's important. What's the narrative? What's happening? The war in Sudan. There is a lot of narratives. However, what is clear, that the Sudanese actually don't have space to talk about their stories. They don't I mean, we're often seen, if you want to decolonize the whole sector, we are storytellers, we're not experts. We're going to be broad and we talk about the suffering and what's happening, but we are not really allowed to bring the expertise to the table, which I think is crucial. And that comes to the quick conversation around accountability, for example. I'm really, really happy to hear you talking about the cases in Paris and working with Fasher, because that's important. They're centered into this conversation. I mean, the old story, if people read Alice in Wonderland about Humpty Dumpty, and it was like, and then it was like when Humpty Dumpty was asked by Alice, it's like, can a word have two meanings? And he said, if I the master, it shall. And that's exactly one of the things about the influences of external backers of the conflict. They control the narrative of like two sides, there's the same. And I think, as I said, I think it's important to really, really challenge that. My last point as well around the accountability discussions. I mean, the ICC being brought here, I believe that we can move a little bit beyond the ICC to talk about a different modality also for accountability for Sudan. I mean, looking into the hybrid examples. Arusha is a very good case. Right now, I think for the EU, the priority is investing in documentation, supporting local groups, making sure Sudanese are part of the conversations, not just the elites. Yeah, so I think that's just quick asks.
Okay, thank you very much for a very important voice. And this gentleman here, yeah, good. And then that one there. And then
so, good day. This is Gamal Akhtar. I'm the Executive Director for the International Federation for Right and Development. We were behind the recent resolution from the European Parliament. We worked hard for almost 2 years to get UAE named. Finally, we did. But we did it in a very particular module. We brought Sudanese people, victims and activists to the Parliament for the past year. And when it was the final push in Strasbourg, we brought 2 activists with us, meeting people that we think that they will be hesitating to vote, UEN, and we managed. And that's not easy. That's not simple. It took 2 years, and we're not alone. A lot of people did it, but lobbying for Sudan, counter-lobbying Lara Nusayba, and 17 lobbyists in the corridors got an office right in front of the plenary. It was tough. It was really tough, but we did it. So, what I wanted to say, really important, thank you very much for your work, particularly the Sentry, because without it, we wouldn't have the proposal for sanctions to the ES. Fortunately, they left, but I don't know if this have been told, but the sanction that we got from Sudan, from the EU, was not the sanctions on the table. There was 2 refineries based in UAE to be part of that sanction. This was moved by Soika because she didn't want to piss UAE right before the EU GCC high-level meeting. That's why the sanction came empty, meaningless. And even they didn't want to add it to the rule of origin into the free trade agreement with UAE. And this is how it became empty. That it was a very meaningful one, but unfortunately it ended very empty. Then, on the other hand, we are pushing, really pushing. Human Rights Watch is also pushing with us into the co-offer. And this trick of ping pong, so they move it to relax, now to co-offer, now you have to run to relax, now to co-offer, and you need to run after these people, and you need to figure out who's in relax, who is willing to talk in relax, and then find out that it's co-offer, so you go back to co-offer, who's willing to talk in co-offer, and then it's easy. You talk to ES, and then ES says, you talk to the member states. Member state says, talk to the ES. ES says, talk to the member states.
Ping pong.
Funny. It's really funny. And this circle, because I have to be honest, the complicity is only in the top 8th, 9th, 11th, 20th, and 13th level of the commission. Everyone from the 1st to the 7th floor are doing their job, but the political will on the top of the commission is the problem. These people really doesn't want to face UAE, doesn't want to give away their free vacations in UAE. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And then this gentleman here.
I will try a different mic. Give it a second.
That works.
Merci. Thank you for the opportunity indeed, and thank you for the efforts. I actually wanted to talk about two things. Let's see the sanction itself as a tool. Is it working? Because we have tried it in Sudan before. The US sanctioned in early 90s, but there is lobbies that working for the big companies push on the decision maker there in US, and they accept the Gam Arabic, which is a big sector as well. Gam Arabic is not less important than the gold. 50% of the population working in the gold sector as well as the Gam Arabic. And the Gam Arabic in particular, because it's like my subject and my interest in research, it's easier to track the footprint because us as a Sudan produce almost over 80% of that. So for the gold, you can smuggle the gold through Chad, through Niger, and put the stamps and put it to the EU, United Arab Emirates. But the Gam Arabic, every single gram of Gam Arabic around the world, it's coming from Sudan. So it's easy to track that. So, and this is the sector that needs to put more efforts in particularly in the research, because there is a gap of research, and we as researchers, we face that gap in terms of availability of data, information, and trying to carry out the deep research that bring to the table the required data to be able to act on. And coming back to the sanction tool as a tool that us as Sudanese, sanction is affecting the people more than the governments, because the sanctions that have been applied on the al-Bashir regime, it doesn't affect the al-Bashir regime, and it wasn't the cause of the falling of the regime, actually. And it has affected the people until now. Implemented early 90s, but until now, people of Sudan are suffering from that decisions. So thank you for the opportunity again. And
yes, David, you want to?
Yes, only very briefly. I think it is important to distinguish those old sanctions directed against the state versus those targeted restrictive measures, they are called in the EU law, aimed at impeding certain businesses and certain individuals from profiting out of the law. Actually, in the decision on the gold sector, there is a human rights safeguard for the local population. So there is a full paragraph, I don't know if Sarah wants to comment on this, but let's say that no activity carried out on the grassroots by those who live as a subsistence from the extraction should be affected by those measures. So the idea is only to touch upon these international interests, which are fueled, which are, which are the investment for those who give the weapons and the other means to carry on with the atrocities. That's the entire goal, to go into the financial structures, not into the real economy. The real economy should continue to work, and actually it would be good if these things would be traded via Chad, but they are not. They use these financial hubs like the UAE, which wants to become the second largest commodities market of the world. That's their goal for Dubai. So, yeah.
You want to come? Yeah, go on.
Just to add some words, I understand your question, and to be really honest, I explained to the victims and to the Sudanese civilians that they don't have to have expectations about, the efficiency. And more than when we see that, the EU or the UK or the US will take sanctions 1 year or 2 years after some revelation from NGOs, Sudanese NGOs, or the Sentry, Amnesty International, or other civil society. So it's always, we are always late. But as David said, targeted sanction, for instance, we did this request on basis on Sentry report and other reports. It's always individual who has, for instance, entities in the Emirates and who are really involved, in the transfer of materials or arms or financial support of weapons. It's not the sanctions like the embargo you can find for Venezuela or for Iraq. It's a different regime. I don't know if it's really efficient, but as I said, as a lawyer, I have to use all the tools that are in front of me, and they can be complementary to criminal justice, which is really long, and we are trying to find an efficient tools at least to shock off, this financial and logistical support. But I'm aware about the fact that it's not, magical, and the people are still suffering, unfortunately.
Listen, thank you so much for everybody, to Kerry and David and Andrea for organising today, and also our excellent speakers, Rodney Dixon, Moneim, sorry, Mohamed, Osman, Matthew, David, and Julie. Thank you very much to all of you for joining us today, and that we can still continue the discussion just afterwards until around 7 o'clock, I think. Thank you so much.